Welcome, everyone. Just a note, this is a Teams webinar, so you will not be able to turn on your camera or your audio to talk. So my apologies about that. It's because we have such a large audience today. But you can definitely post questions in the chat, and I am recording today's session. So once I send out the recording, feel free, if you're doing any sketching today, to take a picture of your sketch and share it with us. We'd love that. But allow me to first introduce myself and our speaker series. So hello and welcome to Goucher Environmental Dialogues. I'm Dr. Jen DeRosa. I'm the director of our Environmental Sustainability and Management program here at Goucher College. And the Goucher Environmental Dialogues is a web-based speaker series that features cultivated conversations with environmental sustainability and climate leaders, visionaries, and innovators. And this is our first attempt at a workshop format. So thank you for being flexible with us and really willing to try out a new skill. Our series is hosted by Goucher College's new master's degree in environmental sustainability and management. If you have any questions about our master's degree in environmental sustainability, I am hosting an information session on November 13th from 1 p.m. Eastern Time to 2 p.m. And in a little bit, I'll post our link tree in the chat, which has links to all sorts of things, our websites, our recorded past and Goucher Environmental Dialogues on our YouTube channel, our social media and all that fun stuff. And but our workshop today is exploring the art and science of nature journaling. And nature journaling involves really documenting your observations, your questions, your noting connections and explanations in a notebook using words and pictures and even numbers. And you don't have to be an artist, thank goodness, because I'm not, or a naturalist to start. Just if you enjoy nature and you want to have a more active way of enjoying it, these skills are really accessible to anyone, and they can be honed and developed through practice. I do recommend that if you'd like to follow along and try this out, since it is a workshop, having a couple of pens or pencils available, colored pencils, piece of paper. I've got a piece of paper here. And as I recommended in my morning email to everyone, I do recommend you have some sort of natural object, like a rock or a leaf, or I have a shell that I thought I'd try out. Just because it gives you something from nature outdoors to sketch indoors. Our guest today is Dr. Peggy Eppig. Peggy is a lecturer at Goucher College in both the undergraduate and graduate environmental programs. She serves as a ranger educator and a program coordinator for the Lancaster Conservancy, where she applies ecology and landscape history to her work in ecological restoration and public education. And Peggy's research includes pilgrimage studies and environmental history. She earned her PhD in environmental studies from Antioch University in New England and her BFA from the Maryland College of Art. So we're in good hands today. And I'd like you to, if possible, using the chat feature to give a warm welcome to Peggy, and also indicate in the chat, if you can, where you're logging in from. And just a reminder, this is being recorded and I will share the recording afterward. And if you have any questions during our workshop today, you can definitely post those in the chat, and I'll try to give voice to those towards the middle of our conversation. So thank you for that. Welcome, Peggy. I'm so excited for this workshop.
Yes, I am too.
Yeah, I thought I'd start with a general question. Um, what is nature journaling? Because I get that question a lot and I don't always have an answer for it.
Yeah, so I put together this quick little PowerPoint. I hope it's not death by PowerPoint. I hope it is interesting, and I don't want to spend too much time with it though, because I want to get to the actual, nature journaling itself. But what it is really a practice that evolved from or developed from pre-camera days, right? Before there were cameras readily available for everybody, especially during the period of our nation's history where exploration was a big thing. Every expedition, every wandering botanist and ornithologist had sketching skills, because there was no way really, to capture what they were seeing, discovering, exploring, recording, um, unless they had, these kinds of skills to take home in sketch form, and sometimes as paintings, right? What it was they were experiencing, new species, new landscapes, and so on. So you can go ahead and advance the PowerPoint.
Thanks, Taylor.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor, for helping out. So I'll just say that these next 3 slides are not my work. This is student work. So I teach in workshop format like we're doing today. I teach in the field. I help co-teach and co-facilitate nature journaling workshops. But I come at it from 3 different perspectives. And this kind of goes back to the age of exploration. Like, why would you want to capture something in sketch form, even if it was really rough? You don't have to be an illustrator. And the one reason was to chronicle, right? To chronicle what you were experiencing, what you were seeing. And that's true for today. I found throughout my early career as a ranger, and also, I was trying to cling to my studies as an illustrator, and found that it just didn't click unless I was working in the field. And one of the things that I found was when I took pictures with cameras, and because they're so easily accessible, everybody has one on their phone these days. We just take tons and tons of pictures. What I was finding early on was I forget why I took the picture. What was so important about that scene or this object that I found I needed to click, take 10 pictures of it. With the nature journaling, with sketching, with field sketching is what we used to call it a while ago. Nature journaling is actually kind of a recent title for this work, is that I could focus in on an aspect of an experience or discovery. And so for this first slide, one subject, so in the student examples, it's bird banding, this one type of sparrow. In the second example, it's this landscape, this one landscape, which tells a whole story. And you can see from the student notation that one issue or that one focal area is not just memory making, right? But it's collecting data on that one issue, in this case, bird banding, and this canal history, which I love. Go ahead and advance it to the next scene or next slide. Another reason for field sketching or nature journaling now is biological forensics, right? The who, what, when, wheres of something you may have witnessed, or a change in a scene, or a sudden or maybe slow process. So these 2 student examples are an encounter with this jay, right, that happened to drop a feather near a campsite. And then the second student example on the right are a number of moths that we encountered in a meadow study. So this is, again, it's sort of kind of data driven, right? You're including all the vital statistics for this experience or this organism. And go ahead and advance to the third reason, and that's phenology. And this is what we were doing at in Lancaster Conservancy, is using our nature journal, or a part of our nature journal series, to focus on phenology, tracking cyclical changes over time, seasonal changes. So these 2 journal examples come from sitting in a particular space often enough, regularly, that you can see changes over time. So these are recording, bud burst or weather or what's in bloom and that kind of thing. Those are the 3 reasons I do nature journaling. There are tons of other reasons people do it, but this is the 3 perspectives from which I teach. Let's head into the next slide. And I apologize if I am just babbling my way through this, because I want to make sure we have time for our actual work. Probably the most important reason I continue to do nature journaling, or field sketching, if I want to use the old term, is that my journals, and I have probably over 30 of them now, I'm getting up there. Is that these field sketch books, these notebooks, or whatever format you get, watercolor books, field sketching, um, become documents. They become chronicles. And well, not too recently, but in the 1990s, we had an example of using Henry David Thoreau's journals from his time visiting and living on Walden Pond. And here you see a copy or an illustration of one of his journal pages where he's making species lists and what time he saw them, and all this really cool data, how large an item, um, oh, how large an item was at a certain time, or whether it was blooming or not. In the 1990s, Brandeis University professor in environmental studies, Richard Primack, discovered that these journals become these important records of change, environmental change. And so using graduate student help, they were able to do a before and after study, then and now, of Walden Pond compared to what Thoreau saw and recorded in his journals, which didn't include too many sketches. It was mostly this kind of data collection with what is there now. And so this became an important landmark study in climate change for New England, Massachusetts particularly. So, that's another reason I look at my own journals, my collection of journals, as sort of documentation that, who knows, maybe 100 years from now, right? Maybe a great grandkid, or maybe a student in some program, maybe Goucher, will, have access to my journals and say, oh, this is what it was like in 2024, and how things are looking now, right? Okay, go ahead and advance.
I was going to say his handwriting is very tricky to try and read. So kudos to anyone
Yeah,
who can interpret that.
kudos for sure. So now we're getting into my work. I'm just showing you examples of the kinds of things I do in place, not in studio, not sitting here at my desk, right? So these are just from the Lancaster, York County area, just across the Mason-Dixon line, north of you guys. So, I am into geology. I love landscape studies. So my geology sketches can be in the middle, like super fast, done on a really cold day. Yes, that is snow. I can't remember when we had snow like that. And I just work with black pen and maybe a couple of watercolor washes or colored pencil, and I leave it and I bring that home. That's nothing that's finished in the field. And so I want to make this point clear that your nature journals, your field sketching is not meant to be finished in the field. It can come home, and the other paintings around that centerpiece were then later kind of finished or inspired or painted right over top of what I did in the field. And then so all three of those on the sides of this slide looked like what's in the center when I did them. And then when I came home, I finished them off, then using the photographs I took to do color checks and that kind of thing. So I don't sit there for hours. I just don't. The centerpiece may have taken me 20 minutes. But then when I come home, checking all my reference photos, anything on the outsides of that slide, left and right, might take an hour, 2 or 3, with a full kit in my studio at home. Okay, next slide.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes my journals are theme or thematic. So the idea that I have a journal that is nothing but coastal exploration. So whenever I'm heading to Henlopen or the Pine Barrens or Virginia Outer Banks, wherever I'm going, that's the edge of sea and land, right? I pick up this journal. So this journal's been going on for a long time. Take it with me when I know I'm going to be going into a coastal environment. So you can keep journals that are themed and take that themed journal with you when you go to that place or those regions, or they can just be a hodgepodge. Okay, next. Sometimes I use toned paper and a really limited palette of color. So whether this is a shipwreck in Maine, very old shipwreck, nothing recent, and some scenes from a walk I did in England, using just a very small notebook, maybe 6x9, because travel, right? You don't want to carry a whole bunch of heavy stuff. I travel with everything I need in my backpack. I don't have extra luggage. So small toned paper journal, a selection of maybe 5 colored pencils and a black pen, always with a black pen. And sometimes I find when I work on toned paper and with a limited palette of color, whether it be limiting a watercolor palette or colored pencil or drawing pencils, I find that I pay way more attention to detail, and I don't know why that is. But there you go. And I find that the drawings I produce are almost finished on site. So compared to something I want to finish out as a painting later, I tend to finish these very limited color pieces in place while I'm there. Okay, next slide.
Oh, wow. These are so
Yeah.
good.
So this is a couple of recent trips we took. Again, I am not a geologist. I just love geology. It's like John McPhee is one of my heroes. Oh gosh, I just love so many authors who write with the geological, framework around what they experience in the environment on their trips and in nature. But couple of trips here over the summer. So these are really recent. And you can notice that my style has changed over time, say from that coastal exploration notebook from a couple slides back to now, I'm really getting into the rocks, right? But the idea that rocks tell the story. I had a professor at MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art, who I loved, and he was a former retired geologist who worked for the oil and gas industry. And for some reason, he started teaching at MICA and teaching landscape studies, and he always started from the geological platform. And he said, whenever you come across a rock, like in the lower left corner, that's a dinosaur bone embedded in a quarry wall at Dinosaur National Monument in Utah, or that this beautiful rock city in Northwest Pennsylvania. He would tell us as we were, little babies at this work, right? Like whenever you have a rock outcrop or a rocky scene like this, it's a book opening. And it's telling you, if you have the language to read that book, it's telling you the history of our planet. And I was so taken with that. I have never forgotten it. So he may be the reason I love adding geology and landscape into my sketch journals and my paintings, the paintings that I finish later, which are based on a lot of the field experiences I have. I also love creatures and animals. I had another professor who taught biological illustration, and we worked from everything from study skins to musculature to zoo models who would sit nicely for us on a warm day in winter. So I've brought that into the fold as well, but I find the same structures can be found in living things as in the geological formations. And I tend to add a lot of notes to my sketch journal pages just based on what was happening in the experience. I don't necessarily add those notes when I'm doing it. So I add notes, when I get back to a hotel room or most likely my campsite. And, it goes from there. Okay, next slide. I think. Yeah, I want to give a huge shout out to my partner in crime, Carol Welsh, who is a volunteer educator at the Lancaster Conservancy. And she and I, and now Mary Patterson, I know you're out there, Mary, participating today, are really pulling together. I just saw that comment. There you go. The idea that we are working to really build out this nature journal program with the Lancaster Conservancy to include, what I specialize in. Carol specializes in other aspects and perspectives of nature journaling. But here we are, the center picture at the bottom was just this past Saturday. Wow, we had a great group come out to Climbers Run. But Carol is a nature journalist in her own right with her own perspectives and own style. And I want to just throw her up there because together we make quite a team. And in the big picture on the right, that was a recent show we shared. That we had a whole gallery space just to do nature journaling artwork. And thanks to our colleague Avery at the Lancaster Conservancy for mounting all that stuff on the wall. That was not easy. But yeah, huge shout out to Carol. And you can go ahead and advance. I just want to make sure I bow down to a master before we finish. So this is the last slide. I know this is being recorded, so if you look at the recording later, you can capture all this data or just take a picture off your screen if you can see it. So all my contact information is on the upper left, lots of emails to choose from, including Goucher. We do give these types of workshops, Carol and I, and now Mary, through the Lancaster Conservancy. You can check out our events page, sign up for one, or if you like my style, and my style is getting out there. I mean, I've led trips. We do overnight backpacking, we do campsite camping, and then day trips. So that's the kind of stuff you like, the more adventurous side of nature journaling. Then do check out my blog, Natural Mid-Atlantic, and then click on the page for workshops and field sessions. And I haven't loaded my 2025 yet because we haven't worked our calendar out. But for either of those, the Conservancy or my own, my own teaching, you can reach me in any way and participate in any way there. So that's it for my PowerPoint. I ran through that.
That's okay. I can also share the information that you had in that last slide when I share the recording, probably by tomorrow. So everyone will get that email with the recording and all of Peggy's contact information. So I guess those were beautiful. and I studied in the geosciences and I still do stick figures in my sketches. So I guess I'm wondering, and I love how you described how you do a certain amount in the field, but it's not necessarily all done in the field. You also come back and do more, like adding watercolors at home. What kind of how do I start? And then I mean, I usually hike with like a field book, but I tend to be scared of doing sketches because I don't consider myself an artist. So how do I start? And then my other question is like, what kind of tools should I be bringing with me?
So I think we've got this screenshot up now of my phone camera that's looking at, do we have that up so people can see that?
Yeah, and it looks like it's spotlighted, so people should hopefully be able to see that. If you can't, let us know in the chat.
Yeah. So I mentioned in the very beginning that this is a practice, right? Underline, highlight that. So anytime you can, even if it's like, okay, I'm confessing here, like meetings bore me so badly. I just cannot pay attention to meetings. And I envy the people who do their crocheting and their knitting, because they're paying attention, but they're doing something with their hands. I'm the one to use my practice time during meetings to do those sketches in my notebooks and my day planners and things like that. Even if you can just practice during a meeting with like sketching something that happens to be on the table or something you stuck in your pocket. And I have to admit that this little trilobite right here, let me put him in front and center, that little trilobite I keep in my pocket. Yes, I carry my pet trilobite around with me. And I pop that trilobite out when I feel like I need to be sketching something, or it could be out anything else that I might find interesting, just carry in my pocket. So sketching when you have opportunity from something in nature, from nature, live, sitting on the desk in front of you, or in your hand under the table. Right?
Okay.
I'm just giving away my boss at work is going to be like, oh, that's what you're doing. What you're supposed to be paying attention to our meeting. But I just spend a lot of time at home practicing from live objects as well. So I don't know, 20 minutes a day, just really focused. It could be in the yard, it could be off the back deck, it could be at work. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have an outdoor job, so I can do something like this 20 minutes on lunch break and just practice in the field, practice at home every day until you're confident with, your the pressure on the pen, for instance, or just doodling. Just doodling is extremely helpful. So I'm going to scoot out of my picture, but into the highlighted picture here and get to work. So one of the things I absolutely cannot be without is my pen. So I just use a regular gel pen. I don't know, you get them anywhere, dollar store, Staples, Walmart, wherever you want to go. It's just a regular Bic kind of gel pen. Let me scoot everything else out of the way. This is my kit, by the way. I'll move the camera around so you can see what I carry in my backpack. I don't carry my pet trilobite in my backpack. Um, so, working with a model for my pet trilobite for one, I work really fast in the beginning. So Jen, you're like, how do you get started? And don't be embarrassed by any of this. Just take a complicated form and break it down into some subforms. So I'm just taking this little trilobite dude. Now, granted, I keep him in my pocket, so I've done this. So if it's something that you're working from for the first time, it's not going to be as, as quick as I'm doing it here. But these are my timed sketches. And timed sketches, when we're doing workshops, we might give people 30 seconds, a minute, at most 2 minutes when we're working in a field situation, to try to capture the essence of an object or an item or an animal, plant, whatever. And that might be it. So I think I talked for a minute. And while I did that, and I listen to music, I listen to the sounds of nature when I'm in the field, however, and if I've got the time, so obviously this trilobite's not going to go anywhere because he's dead. If I have the time, then I'll go back in and really pay attention to some detail, but not a lot. And I use a spiraling pen stroke, Y pen. Well, anyone who's taken a workshop with me knows that I ban erasers. Don't even think about bringing an eraser to one of our classes.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I know. Throw it away right now. Throw it away. So what I do is I encourage people to sketch in pen because you can learn from what you think are your mistakes, right? And then you can draw over mistakes to build up a stronger foundation. So even the strokes and the movements, even this kind of spiraling shading, you may think, oh, that's awful, the first time you do it. But as you build it up, it's like, whoa, this is kind of cool. Now, in field sketching, not so much illustration. I would consider this practice for illustration because you're working on something that's not moving. But in field sketching, you're at the mercy of whatever's flying or roaming or crawling or slithering around or flowing in nature. You might not have the time because it's going to move. So learning a fast field sketching technique like this and building on layers of ink in this case, to capture something before it moves or before the light shifts or the shadows change. That's kind of a main reason for using this technique. It's fast, you can capture the essence before something moves. So I'm going to stop that one right there. That might be what I come home with from a field session.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can use anything that you pick up and bring home. I mean, I have a megalodon tooth. I love fossils too, by the way. My barnacles. Now, if I come home, I'm like, you know what? I really like this. I might want to develop it a little further. So let me pull in, I don't know, I'm going to pull in my field kit. I don't use a big watercolor kit. I don't have like a huge studio space. I live in a 700 square foot cabin in New York River Hills, so I don't have a lot of space for a studio. I have a desk. So whatever I use has to fit on top of that desk. So this is my watercolor kit, and it's a little tiny thing, although I have a smaller one that travels with me. So with an even smaller palette included in these smaller kits. You can get these at Michael's, obviously online, Amazon, but this bigger kit does travel with me. This is my backpack kit. It goes everywhere with me. And if I need to get replacement pigment blocks, you can get those individually and just replace them as you need to. So if I come home or if I'm on a campsite or sleeping in the back of my truck, which I do a lot. I have my truck all kitted out to be my tent under my truck cap. I might come home or wherever I'm working that night and say, oh, I'm gonna develop this out a little more. So with a wash maybe, which is a really light treatment of color and lots of water here, I might think, okay, well, what's the predominant color in my specimen, my pet trilobite? And just kind of mix up a wash that comes close to what I see as the predominant color on that critter, and just kind of give it a little wash. And notice I'm leaving some places alone, so I'm not using a wash on the entire object. I'm saving some of that space for highlighting for where the light is most intense. And I want to extend that wash into its environment as well, because nothing lives in a pure white environment. Another, I guess, intimidating thing that I find people have problems with when we're getting into nature journaling is just the, I don't know, the intimidation of the white page. So I just get rid of the white. And
Do you have a certain color you like to use for the background? Because I noticed in one of your examples, it was also kind of a little bit a pale yellow. I'm just curious.
I use the yellow ochre a lot. So what I'm using now is this yellow ochre, and I'll combine that with something else. So like an overwash with yellow ochre, but still, you know, with maybe some additional color over top of that. Use the correct paper. This is a mixed media paper, which I love. You can find nature journals that are all watercolor paper or mixed media paper. And if you want to try experimenting with, say, soluble marker or watercolor or even acrylic and gouache, you can use on mixed media paper. And by all means, invest in mixed media for your practice. I don't use a lot of super loud color. So I just threw in a little bit of red. That's it. I'm not going to take it beyond that. For background though, you know, white, unless it's freshly laid snow, does not exist in nature as such. So I try to get rid of as much of that white paper as possible. And yeah, so here's those other colors you're talking about coming in. I like to use my blues to help alter the color of the original wash. I might put some blues in for shadow on my object, but not too much.
So in your, you might have mentioned this earlier, in your backpack, do you usually have that small watercolors, or do you just do the pen sketch when you're in the field?
Yeah, if I have the time, if I'm camping and I know I'm going to go back to a campsite or I'm going to have a place where I can sit down and work a little more intensely later, then I'll pull the watercolors out. I don't tend to use my watercolors when I'm actually composing from nature in the space and time that I'm, you know, experiencing something. So that might be what I finish up in my nature journal with, right?
Yeah.
And of course I would want to add, you know, trilobite. This happens to be Sam. I have a couple of them and they're named. I always put the date because again, data that could be important. Not that anyone's going to look at this 100 years from now and say, oh, they had trilobites in 2024. But I do want to say, you know, to say that this is my pet trilobite, Sam. And that this is a practice session. So if anyone needs to look at this at a later time and say, oh, what on earth was she doing? Where was she? Now, if I was at Calvert Cliffs or at Scientist Cliffs along the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm finding stuff like this, right? I'll want to sketch that in place in situ and then make some notes about where I was, maybe what the weather was like that exposed such a huge shark tooth, or maybe who I was with and what we were looking for, and a couple of notes about the day. But yeah, Sam will do for today, I think. Thanks, Sam.
Oh, we had a question in the chat from
Yeah.
Emily about, do you have any tips on adding depth in either still life or landscapes?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, get to know shadowing technique. And this is like a preference, right? So people, depending on how much training you want, or you can do online courses, you can pick up a lot of stuff from nature journalists and YouTube. Some of the best botanical illustrators, one of that I studied under, has an amazing YouTube channel. Sometimes I'll just go to her YouTube channel and take like a 30-minute class with her, whatever she's posted recently on YouTube, just to kind of brush up on some skills. And shading and shadows is one of that menu of skills that are different according to who's teaching it. So if I say, I'm gonna get Sam out of the way here, if I wanted to add depth, um, I would want to know, first of all, the direction of light for this workshop. It's coming from right overhead, so I don't have too much of a shadow to work with here, except for what's directly underneath Sam. But in nature, you'll want to be aware of where the shadows are positioned. So is the shadow on an object or animal or tree? And if so, if there's a distinct shadow, it's probably casting a shadow somewhere. It's probably throwing a shadow onto a surface. So there's the object shadow. So for Sam here, it would be, right here along the side. And for the cast shadow, for this example, now I just threw wash on this, so the pen's not going to be too great. But I can use some cross hatching, which is my preferred way of adding shadow, depth, space. And I would want to go back in and clean this up a little bit. But the cast shadow is what the object is throwing onto the surface. The form shadow is the shadow being occurring on the object itself under whatever light condition. This is the best time of year to go out and sketch in nature because the sun is getting lower. So we have these amazing shadow plays in the woods or in the meadows, and we can really learn to capture both form and cast shadow there. So I'm just, again, using that spiraling stroke, just kind of puffing up some of its own form shadow. And if we had time, I'd go back in and do some more cross hatching here. If interested, if this little sketch really interested me, and honestly it doesn't, this is just a practice, I might throw in some blues and purples for the cast shadow to create the depth of shadow on the surface on which this object is sitting. But yeah, so I would suggest for creating depth, really study shadow technique, and there's no better place than finding either online or coming to a workshop. Not to toot my own horn, but we do concentrate on shadow. Find a place where you can really study shadow and see someone working it.
Okay.
Actually demonstrating. And that's why, like, Carol and I love to work in just ourselves. And I'll watch her, she watches me, and we just kind of experiment and play around with this very thing, shadow and light. So yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, I appreciate the tips. We also had a question from Robin about how do you remember the colors and any tricks that you can suggest to help with that. And I think Robin is referring to if you're doing mostly pen sketch in the field and then you go back and you're adding your colors. And Peggy, I believe you talked about taking a photograph, but can you talk us through kind of that process a little bit more?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I work with a limited palette.
Mhm.
So when I'm creating a color bank or a selection of colors that I have available to me, I always blend and overlap what I have to create these new colors, kind of like when you're working in watercolors. So I'm going to slide into the view here, my limited palette of colored pencils. So this is what I take with me into the field. So I don't know how many that is, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So when you go to Michael's or wherever and you can tell which one I use the most because it's shorter. you get these huge packages of colored pencils. And what I do is I immediately sort through them and choose only those earth tones that I know I'm going to experience in the field. Now, exception to the rule is when you travel, like we did to Utah this summer with my grandson and myself, just to head out into the Utah deserts. This would not be my palette for taking to Utah. I found I took all kinds of you know, colors that I wouldn't have thought or even dared to take into the woods of Pennsylvania, right?
Was that because of the geology in Utah being?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
the light is different.
Ah,
The way the light hits the geology there is different. But yeah, so you're looking, if I took all my little models away, no, goodbye, everybody. If I took all this stuff away and just threw my pen in there, that's my field kit. So
okay.
those colors that I am most familiar with, I can name because I use them all the time. So we mentioned earlier, like, the yellow ochre, which is here, that is definitely an earth tone yellow. Siennas, burnt and raw,
Mm,
across the palette here. I have those in the colored pencils as well. So you'll find the same colors I use in colored pencil are the same ones I prefer to use in my watercolor kit.
great. Yeah, it makes it seem less complicated for anyone like me who's a little daunted by what do I need to bring into the field.
Yeah.
I I also had a question too about, so this is a skill that we're often like working on with our environmental students and our even our graduate students. In fact, our Nepal study abroad course with graduate students,
Mm.
we're asking them to bring a field notebook and
Yep.
encouraging them to do sketches. Um, Another dilemma that I'm curious about, since I tend to like focus on the detailed observations in terms of thinking like a geoscientist, how do you balance those detailed observations with the clearly this is an artistic, creative expression of what you're seeing in nature. So how do you maintain a balance between that? Because it's useful for both the sciences and the artists.
And I don't see one without the other.
Mhm.
I in my mind and in my practice and in my experience of other field artists and geologists who create art, I don't see the two being separate. Um, I prefer to capture images in my field notebooks before I take that first picture.
Okay.
Um, because whatever it is that's drawing my eye to a scene or to an animal, it's fleeting. And even if you're looking at something that's been standing there for 2.5 million years, like this beautiful outcrop my son and my grandson and I visited this past weekend. You can check that out on my Facebook page if you want to see where we were. It's been standing there for 280 million years, but the light changes. And I
Mm,
know that if I'm just snapping pictures, um, I'm not going to capture the nuance that I would be able to capture with my eye right off the bat. What catches your attention first? Add the notes, what time it is, the slant of the sun, the weather. What is like when we're doing geological studies, what is the overall, for lack of a better word, patina, the
mhm.
color of the outer surface of the rock. Of course, it's very different if you crack a rock open or if you submerge a rock in water. It's going to change completely. So I want to make sure to capture what captures my eye first on a page of my field notebook before I even think about pulling the camera out of my pocket or from around my neck. Um, yeah, and those are the types of information that, again, art and science being inseparable in my mind, right? That is, for all intents and purposes, the most important data you're capturing is your first impression. What
Uh,
captures your
mm,
eye. As you learn more about that scene or that object, wherever you're standing or wherever you're visiting, Nepal or the rocky outcrop over the Susquehanna, you
mm.
know, after that, then you can kind of dive into the harder work of understanding what processes put that scene in front of you. And you can make notes about that, or it's how I learn. And I know a lot of the students that I've worked with in the past and continue to work with today, we learn through creating images. And then adding notation as needed. So in my mind and on the paper, I am building a geological formation as I sketch. And as I'm sketching, I'm seeing in my mind and experiencing firsthand how that formation came to be, whether it's weathering, sediments of silt, mudstone, shale, slate, dinosaur footprints, that rock sticking out of the rock wall. I'm drawing the matrix in which that dinosaur bone, or the fossilized dinosaur bone, is sticking out. I'm also drawing the matrix, the stone around it. So yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer to the question. I think just personally, and I completely agree with you. I see how both the science and the art is integrated. I think because I've always assumed I wasn't artistic, I've always been afraid to go deeper with my sketches. But yet, what you're describing is often what we try to teach students is when you're sitting there, what is your first impression? What are your first observations? And there is no wrong sketch. Just starting
Mhm.
out and attempting to capture what you're seeing because it won't look the same when you come back at a different time. The lighting changes.
Mhm.
Um, Also, I guess with that kind of in mind, and I see we have a few other questions, I'm going to try and get to them, but how can we use nature journals as a resource? I'm always interested in like advocacy and getting the word out. How can we use it as a resource for learning, but also sharing environmental sustainability practices?
Yeah, that's I love this question. Man, I wish we had like a whole hour just on this question. Um, so when you do your nature journals or your field sketching, whatever you want to call that notebook that you take into the field, right? And you know what? I'm done on my surface. If you want to switch back out of that picture,
Let
I'm
me
not going
turn it off the spotlight, and I think there you go. I see you
to.
now.
Okay.
Okay.
Do I still have a halo behind?
A little
I
bit, but
feel
that's
magical
okay.
today. I'm feeling really magical. Um, no, that's a really great idea and a great question for us as instructors, right? Um, when we're working with students and incorporating the use of a field notebook, whether it's sketch or written notes or both, which is preferable, I think, for me. Um, this is a chronicle. This is a chronicle of experience. It's also documentation. It's a document of ideas, perspectives, possible solutions. It's a place where a scientist, a researcher, a student of sustainability can record those, not to belittle it, but those tidbits. You're not writing an essay. You're not writing, you know, I don't know, you're not writing a manuscript. You're recording like the essence of an experience or an idea in the sketchbook. And even like we go back to Da Vinci, right? Oh my gosh, when you look at Da Vinci's notebooks, all of his ideas, the things he dreamed the night before, and all of the narrative that he puts into his notebooks about the engineering or the aspects of engineering, those can become not just chronicles and like a document regarding our work in this field, but it is a source of kind of like the ultimate brainstorm, right? A source of ideas that come from that creative eye, the creative mind, where you're putting all of these pieces. Here I am teaching the complex systems thinking, right? All of the pieces that make up a complex system um, can make an appearance in that sketchbook or notebook, and that you can draw from later, right? Or draw from right away. One of the things I love to do in our workshops, and just the workshops that I run, is have people swap their field sketchbooks, and you adopt a person's sketchbook for an hour, and you go into the field and you do a scene basically for them. You're gifting them,
Oh,
your
I love that.
words,
Yeah.
your poetry, a song you might write, a sketch, but you come back with a full page. And that page is inspiration for the book's owner then to say, oh, here's a new perspective. Here's
Mhm.
a new set of eyes. I would have thought to do something like that. So yeah, so these books become I guess, storehouses
Mhm.
of ideas, concepts that we're working on. And I don't want to say solutions to problems, but parts of solutions to problems.
Oh, I like that explanation. And I like your idea of the trading of the notebooks too. I think that's almost a gift that someone's giving someone else. We had a good question from Jeannie. She asks, any tips on other notes you keep in the notebook? Do you also keep notes about how you're
Mhm.
personally connecting with the space, how you're reacting on a more emotional level, perhaps? And she says she asks because she's not an artist. My journaling would be more word-based, and same with mine. I tend to be more word-based. Any questions you ask yourself?
Absolutely. And I have some of my sketch journals that are mostly written in. And the sketches just happen to be doodles. Um, yeah, so questions I ask myself, and this maybe ties into the pilgrimage studies, which is my other life, right, in research. Um, the questions I ask myself have to do with why people behave the way they do in certain places. You know, are they showing reverence? Are they showing disrespect? How I watch people's behavior around a lot of like natural uh, places, parks, scenic overlooks. I just got back from England from doing a 2-week walk in England on a pilgrimage route that's just been reopened. And I was paying attention to people using this route for the first time in 500 years and what they were choosing to, give their attention to. So I write in that vein a lot. The idea of sacredness, the idea of reverence, honoring, memory. And sometimes I tie in my own sense of memory. When I do pilgrimages here in the States, it's usually to an environmental disaster site. It sounds silly. The dark pilgrimage, right? So I found when I took my friend and I, she's from Western Pennsylvania. Um, we went up to Denora on the Monongahela River, which is a site that inspired the Clean Air Act because of a great disaster that happened there. And I found myself writing in that regard, self-reflecting about, government policy, and it all came from this one instance, this little blip in time where people lost their lives because of, factory and steel plants polluting the air. Um, and I came from that. I came back with those notebooks with all of this reflection on this pilgrimage we took, and it turned into a book chapter, for a book that I've been working on for some time now. As you know, Jen, I think I'm up to 10 years on this book. But anyway, yeah, that's a great question.
I was going to show you how I did first, and then I think I have a few more questions I might try to get to in the chat. So here is my essentially a chambered nautilus shell. I love shells
Sweet.
too. And here was my attempt. This is me who's afraid of sketching.
Don't
So,
apologize. Oh,
um, so
what?
I was doodling while you were talking about it, and I feel like I feel good for the first time, and I'm wondering why don't I try this more often? So I think I'm going to uh, thank you, Jeannie. I think I'm going to be carrying a small kit of watercolors and a few more pencils with me on our study abroad experience. We had
Nice.
a few other questions, and I'm trying to squeeze a few in. April wanted to know who was the person that you mentioned watching on the YouTube tutorials?
Oh gosh. During the pandemic, a lot of these teachers who used to teach in studio in person, of course, all moved to the online environment to continue their teaching. So, although she's retired, you can go back and find YouTube interviews and demonstrations with one of my favorite instructors, Claire Walker Leslie. Claire Walker Leslie. Where's her book? I have to find her book. Um, she was an occasional teacher in my program. I did not have a semester of her, but her style of teaching and the way I learn meshed, right?
Mhm.
Um, so the pandemic brought us these amazing people who maybe weren't not familiar with the online environment the way we are now, but who were giving it their best shot during the 3 years we were, dealing with online teaching. There's a couple of really gifted biological and botanical illustrators, but I want to draw a line between the field sketching nature journaling crowd and the illustrator crowd. I trained as an illustrator, and although I still occasionally love to do the hard-edged illustration type work, my heart is with field sketching, that more creative, experimental, there's no wrong or right answer kind of thing as compared to illustration where it's accuracy and detail. But having said that, you can learn a lot from some of our botanical illustrators who have YouTube presence, and there's a bunch of them. Just in the search bar on YouTube, just put in botanical illustration, and I guarantee that the top 5 that pop up will be some pretty well-known and very gifted illustrators. Just know there's that difference between field sketching, like Claire Walker Leslie, and the illustrators. There's also John Muir Laws. So yeah, his name is John Muir, but his last name is Laws. You can look him up. He's got a huge internet presence, web pages, websites, and he offers a lot of instruction as well. Cornell University. Oh my gosh. Learning to draw birds with their online courses. I gifted my son and daughter-in-law of Cornell how to draw the birds
Neat.
online course, and they love it. So yeah.
Oh, good. I've heard good things about Cornell's program for ornithology, and they have some recognizing bird calls and things like that I've heard too. I'm going to try and squeeze 2 questions in. One was from Kate asking if you can recommend a brand of watercolors, or do you not have a preferred brand?
Yeah, I do have a preferred brand. They're not the cheapest, but they last really long, and their colors are wonderful. Winsor Newton. So I'm trying to reach for it. Yes, Winsor Newton colors. These are easily accessible in our local craft shops,
Okay.
like Michael's and that kind of thing. But I usually get mine online. Winsor Newton is for me the best, and I'll just stop with that because I could go on and on about that.
Okay, and then I just have time to ask one more question from Kate. How do you bring your brain down to focus on just one thing? Like, I think that's a dilemma for many of us. Like, I guess, what is your process?
Music. For me, it's music. I don't know what I would do without my Spotify.
Oh, I agree.
Right?
Okay.
So yeah, I tend to, and my daughter and I just had this conversation in a Facebook chat this morning. She's an artist in Delaware. She runs her own studio. And we were like, what music is essential to you to bring focus to your work? And it's going to sound new agey, but it's how I trained and how I learned. But I love Kitaro, Kitaro, a Japanese composer. I don't know. His work just kind of sends me into that zone. And literally, I'm not listening to individual tracks, because if I were to focus on the music, I don't know what I would get done. I would swoon. I have swooned, but like hours can go by, hours, listening to that type of music, Kitaro, that ambiance kind of music. But I don't know. We both voted Kitaro as our number 1, so I don't know.
Oh, that's great to hear in terms of the creative process. I think that helps
Yep.
people think about their approach. So we're right at the 1 o'clock. So I want to first thank Peggy. And since it's virtual and you guys can't really applause, you can post virtual applause in the chat just by saying thank you. And then the other thing is I'm going to send out this recording probably by tomorrow with some of the resources that Peggy mentioned. And if you practice sketching during this webinar, we would both love to see you take a picture and share it so we can just see kind of the inspiration that Peggy's work has brought.
I would
And
love to see those sketches. Oh my gosh, you guys, send them in.
yeah, send them to both of us, and that would just be great. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peggy. And we will probably have to follow this up with a part 2 sometime in the future, but thank you very much.
Great.
All right.
Thank you, guys. See you.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone. Bye.